So these are camber bolts, and these are the things that I'm replacing on the MX5 prior to the alignment of the car, purely on the basis that they are knackered. So the camber bolts have these eccentric cam washers, and what they do, which I'll show you in a second on the arms, is they will move the arms in and out. There's 4 on the front, 4 on the back, and they align the car, both toe, camber and caster on the front. These are original ones from the car, and we know they're original because, in a second, they have, I can barely make it out unfortunately, they have a D shape to them which holds them in place. As you can see on these, they've been adjusted so many times that D is no longer a D. Well, it is, but it's not as much a D as it once was. What we've done is we've upgraded to a set of non-stretch, in theory, cam bolts, cam adjusters, and these have got 2 slots on the bolt, top and bottom, and these are supposed to be superior insofar as they are stronger. And whether this works out to be true or not, there's an argument as to whether you should be replacing them every time you do an alignment, because some of them are stretch bolts. In theory, they're all stretch bolts. So yeah, well, it's having new ones. It's got to be better than the original ones from 1989. Right, so underneath the car, at the rear of the car, you can see that the camber bolt sits off centre with a surround that cannot move. And by turning the bolt itself, the rear arm lengthens and shortens. Obviously you can work it out that we've got 2 on each arm. So by lengthening the arm as much as possible on the bottom, you get camber, negative camber, and then by offsetting one to the other, so if we have one long and one short, say for example we have the rear one long, the front one short, you'd get toe in. Now this is desirable on cars that were perhaps unsettled on the rear. You'd have a certain amount of toe in. If the car was particularly understeery, you'd toe out. But you have the same adjustment on the front. Ignore where the bolts are to, because they were just put in to move the car. On the front you have the same. However, on the front you have one bolt almost in parallel with the centre hub. The rear is, what should we say, a foot, 30 centimetres, 300 millimetres behind the front bolt. When you adjust the rear bolt, you're adjusting the length of the centre of the wheel, which I'll show you in a second with the actual adjustment. And this determines the caster. Now the caster is how far the front wheels are off centre with the vertical pivot point. So you have a top arm which cannot move and a top point that cannot move. By lengthening the rear camber bolt, sorry, that then also adjusts where the centre is and leans the front wheel back on a vertical axis. This gives the car more bite, and it also stops, also gives a huge amount of self-centering to the wheel. This is, it's quite a good thing to have in a race car, so that the front tyres actually dig into the road. well, I'll show you in a second with the live adjustment. Also, what we've got here is the track rod ends. So these are ruined on that side. This side's probably a better one to show you because it's brand new. Okay, so we've got a new ball joint on the end, which is a new track rod end. So we've got that there is the locking nut. So you undo that, you turn this, obviously this cannot move. This lengthens and shortens, and this gives you your toe in, which is making it shorter, toe out, pushing it out. The vehicle, well, for MX5s generally, they like a tiny, tiny amount of toe in on the front, and we're talking maybe half a degree. The rear likes to be neutral to a tiny bit in, depending on your personal preference. So excuse the noise, but that's the heater going because it's cold. So we're looking at the front suspension of the MX5, specifically the front toe arm. With MX5s, they only have a toe arm on the front, even though they're double wishbone suspension, they don't have it on the rear. Lotus leases and other cars with double wishbone suspension generally use a toe link on the rear so that you can adjust the toe on the rear of the car slightly easier than you can on the MX5s. The MX5s have two fixings on the rear strut. And if we go down, I'll show you. You can see the underside of my car. Right, so as you can see on the rear suspension arm, you've got two, I'll focus, fixings. So the hub is effectively fixed in place. You can't move it like you could do, say, the front, which has, I know it has ball joints. So the only way that you can adjust the rear toe is by offsetting the adjustment of the front and the rear, sorry, the front and the rear camber bolts, and that adjusts your camber and your toe by pulling one leg in and one leg out. So it's not perfect because you're also kind of sort of twisting the arm. Going back to the front, obviously we went through the caster. You do have camber, so toe arms. So with these, I've just cleaned them up and gone through the threads to make sure that they're adjustable, which they are. Now this side has got a new ball joint and inner and outer toe arm. So I think what I'll do is I'll replace, it makes a bit more sense, I'll probably look at replacing the driver's side for a new set. At the moment I'm going to adjust it so that I can get out on the track just to test the car. So yeah, you have an inner and outer. So what you do is you undo the locking nut, and apologies for telling people to suck eggs. So you undo the locking nut on the inside and you turn the shaft. So as you can probably see, that shaft, you put a spanner on. And when you turn it, it obviously lengthens and shortens the arm relative to the ball joint, which is threaded. On this side, obviously you can see that it's fairly old. And although I put new arm, polybushed the arms, the toe appears to be, as you'd expect, slightly odd. I'll show you what I do to align. So what we'll do now is hopefully a little live demonstration as to how the caster works by adjusting that new bolt and marking a fixed point on the floor. The car's in the air, but the little bit of wood will hopefully show you what happens when we adjust the caster. So you can see it's moved. So it needs a small amount, but it only needs to be a small amount. So that's from full extension So we've dropped the centre line of the wheel back now, which will reduce the caster. And we'll push it all the way forward. And that's maximum caster. Just a tiny bit off of that. Again, this is very much a personal preference, how to set up the car. But I thought it'd be interesting just to show you as to how adjusting that bolt lengthens that arm in relation to the fixed pivot point of the top arm. It's difficult to understand. I vaguely understand. I am nowhere near as educated with this sort of stuff as a lot of the guys racing are, so a bit of trial and error on my behalf. So we'll just replace this one now, and then I'll show you through my DIY string alignment set. So I don't know if the camera's picking this up, but I've got a string line that runs all the way down the length of the car. Okay, probably isn't making it particularly helpful. So I've created a box around the outside of the car, to which you've got a square effectively, so you've got two parallel lines running off one set of wheels of the other. And once you've got this parallel line set, you can measure on the line based on the front and the rear rim. So at the moment on this one I've got 55 on the back, and sorry, try that again. Come on, think about it. So we've got 55 on the front, nearly 60 actually, but the camera's not picking up very well. And we have 57 on the rear. So at the moment we've got the miles toe out. There is, this is a real dark art, and I don't know enough to say what works for an MX5, but about neutral's got to be about right. So what we'll do is we'll probably add in a tiny bit of toe out. Tiny, we're talking a millimetre or two, so the car's got more turn in. Toe on the rear of the car. So if you've got a particularly wayward rear, so the rear feels unsettled, you'd add toe in on the rear. And if you've got an understeery car, you'd add toe out to make the rear try and move on its own. So with regards to corner weighting, the way you adjust the weight on each corner is not by adding more weight to that corner, as fast as it sounds. What you're looking to achieve is, if you can imagine a pub table, it's always a bit wonky, so that you sort of rock it. So what you do is you end up putting a beer mat under the leg that's shorter. Well, what you're trying to achieve with corner weighting is exactly the same. The corners with no weight on, you're trying to pull the springs down, and then what that achieves is putting extra weight on that corner. And you make sure you do this opposite each other, so the car should in theory maintain the same level and same height, but balance out where the weight is distributed. On the Gaz Golds, obviously they've got two locking collars you can see in front of you. The bottom one is the locking collar, so you adjust the top one for the height of the spring perch, and you lock it in place by counter turning the bottom one into it. Also on Gaz Golds, you'll see there, that's the adjustment for the damping, which is either firm or loose. Next on the list is polyurethane engine mounts versus the original rubber ones. So a bit of a bone of contention these as to whether they're worth fitting, and if so, how hard. They do tend to cause a lot of vibration in the car, which, you know, is probably not, you know, you wouldn't fit them on a road car. They do take an awful lot of driveline slop out of the car for racing purposes, but then, you know, some people don't suggest that they're particularly sensible because they're too hard. So we've got them cheap enough. They're cheaper than, well, they're pretty much cheaper than standard engine mounts actually. So I'm going to put them in and we'll see how we go. I'm going to keep the old ones. Worst comes to worst, I'll refit them. Yeah, we'll give them a go and see what they're like. While we're underneath, I'll be changing the fuel filter. I have no idea how old it is, but the lines, the bits that I really don't like, especially the top one, I prefer not to catch on fire, so I'll be changing those. So for cutting fuel line, these guys are invaluable. They're proper pipe snips. So where you've got a very sharp blade and a rounded housing that the blade can pass through. You can cut them with Stanley blades, etc., but they tend to either snag or you never cut square. So I would recommend them. I mean, they're really cheap, so they're worth having. If you're going to do a bit of DIY plumbing of your fuel lines or whatever, yeah, buy a set of these.